passing by me.
Good morning, everyone. This is Chris with Inspired Energy. Welcome this morning. Good morning, Hartwell.
Good morning, Chris.
So, this morning we're taking up the task of talking about the true self and the not self. In this is episode 8, it's the relationship between the two. So, Hartwell, how can you tell us about human design and what the true self is, or the authentic self?
The true self is that which is consistent in us. So riffing off what we talked about last week in the defined and the undefined, the defined in you constitutes your true self. So when you're in alignment with that, then you're in alignment with your true self.
Mm-hmm. So what is the strategy and authority, or how can we live our true self? Like, what does it mean to be in alignment?
Our strategy and authority are what ground us, Chris. Mm-hmm. So when we speak about grounding in other contexts, like healing contexts, or just as we go through our life, this is what strategy and authority provide for us. We ground down into that which is consistent in us, that which is reliable, which is that which is defined. Another way of saying our true self. Mm-hmm. And it functions to keep us aligned with our own particular path through the world.
Right. So if that's the true self or the authentic self, how would you describe the not self?
The not self is all the patterns of behavior that have arisen from the conditioning of our environments as we've grown up. Mm-hmm. So it arises because if we're not following our strategy and authority, then we start to, wherever we're white in our design is where we take on patterns from our environment, and we begin to feel, oh, I should be like that, or I should be like that. And so we unconsciously morph to be more like what we feel is expected from us. And therefore, we end up creating resistances in our life.
Right. So then in those white areas, that's where we're prone to things like peer pressure and influences from media or entertainment, things like that. Is that what you mean?
Well, yes, all of those things. And also, of course, growing up in a family, everybody has their own design. So mm-hmm. Every one of those is a pressure towards or away from our own true self. Right. So, they have their own design, which is perfect and beautiful for them. And so do we. They're unique, just like we are. Mm-hmm. But yes, the white in us is where we are vulnerable to that amplifying the effects from the world.
Right. So how do we know if we're actually living in alignment with our design? What would that look like?
Well, let us talk about how we know when we're not, and then I'll also answer your question.
Right.
When we're not in alignment with our design, we experience resistance as we move through the world. So we went through the 4 types in the last few weeks, mm-hmm. and we spoke of how generators experience frustration when they're not aligned. Right. And they experience satisfaction when they do. Mm-hmm. Projectors feel bitterness when they're not aligned, and mm-hmm. they feel they experience success when they are in alignment. Mm-hmm. Manifestors experience anger arising in them when they're misaligned with their design, and right. They experience peace when they are. Right. And finally, the reflectors, who are such a small part of us, they experience disappointment, disillusionment when they're out of alignment with their design, and they experience surprise and wonder when they are in alignment. Right. So if you experience any of those things, the one that's related to your particular design, then that is a tip-off that you are not in alignment. When we are in alignment with our design, then we are guided along the path of the right work for us and the right relationships and the right, we're guided along the path of our destiny. But when
go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to say, so then that kind of sparked in me the thought of the law of attraction, where you start attracting those things to yourself which align with whatever it is you're focused on. So yes. That was what came to me as you were speaking that.
Well, I like that you bring that up, because human design has a very particular language, and I've studied many different systems. So it's useful to be able to talk about, oh, well, this system says this system says that. We have to do some of the work of piecing those things together, right, so that they live in our own experience is the truth. So thank you for asking that. It's, if I were to riff on that for a minute, because I like questions like that, you might say that, the law of attraction could always be useful to align us with our design, as long as we haven't, in a sense, taken on from our environment goals, desires, and dreams that are not really in alignment with who we are. Because I could easily, as a result of pressure from my environment, I could easily say, oh, I want to be this, I want to be that. But there's only, your design really does suggest how you're going to function in the world as your best self. There are things that I'm not able to do, and no amount of law of attraction work is going to, allow me to do it. So we have to be, we have to be in attunement with ourselves.
Yeah, but it's like, when I think about that, I think about, for example, I have an undefined G center, right? So whenever anybody has a hope or a dream or a purpose or whatever, I'm always going, okay, well, let me see what I can do with that. Let me see if I can play with that. So it sparks that area of exploration within me, right? Yes. So sometimes I take on too many things or too many things of other people's that don't belong to me, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you do have the undefined G, which, makes you open to wondering what your role is in life. And you have that channel that's all about fantasy and dreams and the sparking of things.
Right.
So it's nice to throw in a little bit of you here. I hope you don't mind that.
Yeah, that's okay.
But you're right on that. It's the not self mind that becomes the big problem.
Right. Because it's always thinking that you have to do that. Not necessarily. It's just an invitation, but is it in alignment with the rest of you, right?
Yeah, the mind doesn't know. The mind doesn't know. And one of the very interesting things that human design says is that before the discovery of Uranus in 1781, we were 7-centered beings. Right. The Hindu chakra system, what we normally think of as the chakras, but human design says we have 9. So we evolved. And before we became 9-centered beings, the mind, which is a center for mental awareness, the ajna, it ruled the show. It was how people made their decisions. But we are now more complex and more evolved as 9-centered beings. So now we have our own individualized authorities that exist within us. And so the mind is now a bigger problem than it would have been earlier in our genetic history, according to human design.
Right. We would have listened a lot more to our intuition and our feelings and things like that before. Is that what you mean?
Well, actually, no. I mean, human design suggests that, prior to 1781, our mind was the proper authority.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we did not have as clear access to our the individualized authorities that we have now were not in place.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's a very different story. And
Right.
we're going to go into that story in a couple of weeks, about the primary inner authorities.
Right.
But we have to think about what the not self mind is really doing in our lives, Chris.
Right. So how is the not self actually formed and maintained throughout our life?
The not self is formed as children, and it arises from the mind's attempt to protect us from traumas, protect us from fears, to protect us from being hurt.
Right.
And it arises in our not self centers. In our open centers, our undefined centers. And so wherever we're undefined is where the not self mind will develop a dialogue to try and keep us safe. And so it thought it was trying to keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
But really it started to develop a pattern where we compare ourselves to others.
Mm-hmm.
So it would encourage us to be hypervigilant.
Mm-hmm.
It would encourage us to compare ourselves to others. And that's why we end up looking at others and saying, oh, well, they're different from me. I should be like this. I should be like that. And so it develops this pattern that then takes us away. And then because of its fear and being like an overprotective parent,
right,
it becomes hypervigilant, and it doesn't allow us to relax and trust our own strategy and authority. So it kind of mucks things up.
So what happens when we actually do follow our strategy and authority? What does that look like?
When we follow our strategy and authority, it looks like we trust that which is in us to make the decisions that are going to be right for us. And so we surrender to the clarity that arises from our own groundedness within our beings.
Mm-hmm.
So we use strategy, we use our inner authority, and we relax. And so have we spoken about the metaphor of the car yet, Chris?
Yeah, the vehicle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in the metaphor that human design paints, our body is the vehicle. The red in us is the vehicle. And the driver is the magnetic monopole, an inbuilt function that pulls us along the trajectory of our purpose. Mm-hmm. And the conscious part of us is the passenger. So if we follow strategy and authority, we stop being the backseat passenger, and we allow the driver to drive and take us along the trajectory of where we need to go, which is inbuilt.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get to live a life of those, the success patterns, which I talked about, this satisfaction, success, peace, and wonder and surprise.
Right. So I guess that kind of answered the next question about how important is it to make those decisions based on your strategy and authority. So we'll just move on. How would you illustrate the effect or the not self mind on our lives?
Well, how I see that is that it creates all of this dialogue in us that stresses us out, that can create patterns where we make decisions based upon mind, and they often lead in directions that are really unproductive for us. We end up feeling stressed out. We end up being in situations and environments that we're not equipped to handle because
Right.
we made the decision based upon our not self mind.
Right. Or we just didn't think at all.
Yeah. If we make things, if we make decisions based on strategy and authority, then we end up in the right environments where we have all the abilities and talents necessary to do what it is we are meant to do, because we're on the right trajectory.
Right. So we should just listen to our inner authority and operate as ourselves in order to have a more peaceful, harmonious life, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. To feel grounded, to feel present to our lives, and to feel like our life is for us, and that life is not a shit show. Life is not a scary place. I think a lot of that scariness that we experience in life is because so few of us are living on the basis of our strategy and authority.
Yeah, we actually had a discussion the other day. I was talking with my friend Ahmad from Calgary, from the Son of Pharaoh, and we were talking about, for example, stress. And we were saying, well, is stress good or is stress bad? But really what we were talking about is like that pressure that comes upon us. And if we operate within our proper authority, then it creates evolution, not that your world is falling apart and it's terrible and all of those things, right? So this really demonstrates that
Yes.
how important it is to develop and be that authentic self rather than trying to be somebody that you're not.
Good example. Very good example. And then we get to be in the environments around the people and in the life that fits for us. It's like trying on clothes, and does this garment fit me? And in the right environment, you have all the skills necessary to be who you're meant to be. You have all the talents that you need, and then your true talents get to shine. They get to come forth.
So is there anything that you want to tell people to wrap this segment up for today?
Well, yes, I would say what Human Design always says. Learn how to be grounded in your own physical organism, and get a Human Design and realize what is reliable in you and ground into that, and then make your decisions based on strategy and authority. I think that a lot of spiritual systems and holistic health systems have it right. We need to ground into our bodies through our breath, and through, we need to be aware of how we move, aware of our physical organism.
Yeah.
And that is one of the best ways to start to drop into that alignment, I think.
Right. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Hartwell, for sharing your wealth of wisdom and information on the Human Design System. So join us next Wednesday. We'll go back to 9:30, and we'll be talking about the 9 centers. We'll be doing a survey of the 9 centers and their not self strategies. That'll be part 1. And then the following week, we'll do part 2. So we look forward to seeing you. And once again, thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions about it or anything, you can join us here at Clarity, or you can give us a call at 587-596-3333. Book an appointment, come in. We'd love to see you. So with that, we'll say God bless. See you next week.